Sometimes I resist, and I mean I really resist going after young conservatives because, oh boy, if there was like shooting fish in a barrel, I could just dedicate this entire channel to like covering the blogs, the nonsense that like the young conservatives get up to. And this is a group of, again, young people who think that the past sort of term in government was absolutely wonderful. And again, like every conservative, they did nothing wrong. And oh, if only they were more conservative or they were really conservative, things would happen. However, as you may remember, we've covered that a lot of young conservatives are, well, they're starting to slowly but surely revolt against the party. Actually realize that the party has never really offered them anything, mostly because, well, they're getting older and it's a lot more difficult to remain a young conservative when they're starting to realize that, yeah, their party really never gave them anything, never really offered them anything, or wouldn't really enact any policies that would help a lot of these, young conservatives. But of course, many of them do come from, quite privileged backgrounds, as we'll see here, where they are managing to become, chief associates of like the Green Association. And this isn't like, the Green Party. No, this is like the Village Green Association, Yeah, I bet he brings the average age down on that association by quite a considerable amount, as we'll see in a moment. But honestly, I would love to have a chat with one of these young conservatives. It would be wild. It would be wacky, but getting their views on what they think of their current party would be fascinating. Fascinating here, as we'll see in a moment. This guy thinks that somehow the Conservative Party can just soldier on, if only, once again, echoing what we've heard before, returned to its true conservative roots. But what are those conservative roots? We've never heard anyone said, and when someone does bring them up, you can see in the comments down below, especially as we'll see in Conservative Home as always, not a lot of people agree. So let's crack on then into this. But before we do that, please do remember to click on like, share, and of course subscribe button. Down below, of course, there's the Patreon page, there's the Buy Me Coffee link, there's the YouTube thank you button. You know all the jazz by now. And of course, let's crack on into this. So over on Conservative Home, by the Adam Joyner, with the title of After the Local Elections, What Comes Next? Well, not a good time. As we've seen recently. Not a good time indeed. So anyone following this week's local elections knew the Conservatives were in for a very tough time. Coming off the back of a very historic defeat, it was never going to be an easy pill to swallow, especially as the last time many of these seats were, of course, contested was in 2021, when the Conservatives were, of course, riding high. With the Conservatives losing now 676 council seats, the Lib Dems gaining 163 and Reform gaining 677, and of course, managing to secure just a measly 7.2% of the vote in the Runcorn and Hesley by-election, the Conservative vote, quite frankly, collapsed. And that's one of the big things that isn't being discussed about these local elections, the fact that the Conservative vote has well and truly collapsed. The fact that you look at these turnouts, 30% is nothing. Absolutely nothing. You want to dig into some of those Reform victories, and you see people winning on like 100 votes because the turnout was that bad. This is what a lot of people, I think, once again at this election, don't understand, that because the turnout was that low, because Farage, once again, as he always manages to do, gets his voter base out and motivated to vote, guess what? He managed to secure some wins, even as we've seen now, control of councillors and 2 regional mayors. One in particular, Luke Hall, who has absolutely no idea what he's doing, and the fact that he's got to now set up an entire regional mayoralship. He is no clue. But anyway, maybe we'll do something on that later. But back to this. Now, of course, on the face of it, it would be a very hasty conclusion to draw that the Tories are now finished electorally. However, it was always going to be a long and difficult process to rebuild back after the general election. We've gone through at least 6 leaders in 15 years, and we can't give the party stable leadership. How can people expect us to give it to the UK? Well, it's not just the fact that you've had unstable leadership, it's the fact that over those 15 years, what happened? And also, you now have to really deal with reform. Arguably, now a lot more, slightly more electorally successful version of UKIP that is now chomping away at your vote share. As always, as we've said, there cannot be two parties of the right. When that happens, the right wing doesn't win. That's why you've seen a lot of people on here and elsewhere where we've covered this, they're all about, oh, we need to unite the right. We need to unite the right. Because a lot of those people on the right are very quickly recognizing the fact that that right-wing vote is now split. No right-wing party can ever really win a general election again. So back to this. And now this is where we get what must come next and what they've got to do next. So the question now we have to ask ourselves, though, is what comes next? I've increasingly been told that to survive, the party must either swing right to squeeze out reform or hold the line in the centre and face down the Lib Dems. So that is, again, the two arguments that I will agree with him are in vogue. When you look at all the stuff the Conservatives are saying, you swing right, guess what? You ain't going to squeeze out reform because those voters are always going to go and vote for Farage. Why would you vote for Farage light when you can have full fat Farage? Going right wing doesn't make any more sense. Going back into the centre and trying to fight more on the centre ground and take on the Lib Dems would make a lot more sense because you ain't going to retake those reform voters. They're gone. Quite significantly gone. But again, you will get a split in the Conservative Party because why? There are two factions. You've got the right-leaning centrists and you've got the right-wingers. They're going to tear the party apart. Always was, always the case. And until that happens, the Conservative Party is going to be in an absolute mess. So, I love it. This false dichotomy misses the point. Complete false dichotomy. Okay, why does it miss the point? Between, of course, the centre and the right is exactly where we should be as a centre-right party. You mean the very, very thing that your entire right wing of the party disagrees with being. The entire thing that has caused so many problems in your party. Do you not recognize that a lot of your party did not like that label, did not like that they had gone that close to the center? Like I say, they cannot recognize the sorry, sad state of their own party. So the answer is not to abandon our position. What position would that be? It is to clarify and unify around it. We need to be clear on our principles. Forgetting them cost us last year, and unless we address this, we will never recover. It wasn't the fact that Rishi Sunak forgot his principles. It wasn't, once again, alluding to this argument that, oh, we just needed to be more conservative and Britain is yearning for conservative rule. That is not the case. That is not borne out in any reasonable study, poll, or anything like that. But they keep on indulging in these arguments because they cannot bear to think that it is their party, it is their policy, it is their ideology that has done them in. Because they just cannot face themselves, because they would have to ask some very deep questions and they can't do so. So back to this. The Conservative Party is a broad church. Well, not anymore. And it should remain that way. But we need a core set of guiding principles we can all agree on. Liberty, free enterprise, low taxes, equality before the law, democracy. These are all values that we must hold fast to or face now being ostracized by the electorate. Except the electorate unilaterally rejected that. Massively so. Also, low taxes. What is the government no longer going to do? What are you going to lower government spending on? The age that you can somehow say, oh, low taxes is over. It's gone. We are probably going to become, again, a lot like more other countries that have a lot higher tax rate. The big question is now is A, where that money gets spent and where those priorities should be, and what other stuff should we tax on top of that. Those are the big questions, really, that A, Labour is probably facing, Labour is facing really right now, and certainly for future governments, they're going to have to facing those other same questions as well. Furthermore, he continues, there are, of course, basics we need to get right to build ourselves back up. The first thing we can do is need to accept responsibility for the last 15 years. Okay, except this is another thing. Responsibility for what? And why? And are you going to admit that things went wrong? So, yes, there are, of course, parts of our record that we should be proud of, like raising standards of numeracy and literacy for our children. However, we failed now to deliver on immigration. We failed to deliver on the NHS. We failed to deliver on substantial economic growth. There is no use trying to defend the last 15 years of Tory rule to people who suffered because of our failure. Houses foreclosed, appointments unavailable, energy bills higher. We need to stand up and admit that we made serious mistakes, and we will be punished for them at the polls and continue to be. Brave of him to admit that, but hey, he's a young Tory, doesn't have to face the consequences of that. Um, Again, all those. What about your policies? Why did the NHS, fail? Why did immigration collapse? Why did it fail under you? What happened? Was it about your rhetoric, trying to blame immigration and leaning into that, that right wing stuff on immigration? So much other stuff. Oh, economic growth. You had the Northern Powerhouse idea by Cameron Osborne. If you had actually done that, that would have actually been quite successful. But even then, they could not commit to doing that. They just could not commit to doing it. So, aside from this, we also now need to realize our other political parties, are, of course, aren't our friends. Yes, the bipartisanship on key issues like supporting Ukraine is important, but the other side is, of course, not our ally. There absolutely should be bipartisanship. And to get things done, if you are a minority party, if you're in the opposition, then guess what? You need allies. You need allies on a lot of that stuff. And then I always love this because you've got one side who tells me Labour are just the new Tories, but when you read a lot of stuff from the right, they don't agree. They do not agree on that, as we see here. Labour and the Greens are completely ideologically opposed to us. They do not value our liberty or free enterprise, and they want to put taxes through the roof. Again, who's right on that? I just look at both those sides and just go, if that was the case, why are the right saying the exact opposite to you? you Ed Davey, of course, wants to see the Conservatives wiped out in local government. Reform is, of course, committed now to the total annihilation of the party. At every opportunity we now to take on our opponents, we need to take the talk of a pact reform against Labour is, of course, just defeatism. They don't want to work with us. They want to destroy us. And in turn, we must work to put Farage in a retirement home. Good on him for saying that. That they shouldn't be doing a pact with reform. Great. Admitting that that they just want to destroy the party. Good. Not enough Conservatives acknowledge or even really realize that. I want to put Farage in retirement home. Well, how do you do that? How do you go about doing that? And it's not by copying him, which seems to be the modus operandi at the moment. Unfortunately, even the current government as well seems to be doing some of that stuff. Moreover, at the core of the party is, of course, its members, the people who, of course, get up and go to out on the rainy morning and knock on doors, deliver leaflets, input data, raise funds. The list goes on. We wouldn't be anywhere without them. They may become now amazing candidates now for local areas. They may even dedicate so much of their time to that of the party's success. However, it is of course no secret that our membership isn't what it was. It is falling now from around 3 million in the 1950s to roughly 130,000 numbers as of November 2024. Wow. That is dire. If that is true, because the Conservative Party has been very ropey about what its actual numbers are, if that is true, and that is a real statistic as of November of 2024, that is dire. That is dire. So there are plenty of Conservative sympathizers up and down the country. We need to try and engage with them as many as possible to get them involved, whether what they become, of course, full party members or just delivering the box of leaflets up and down the road by becoming a party of people that can begin to rebuild the trust that we lost. And that's the key thing. How are you going to rebuild that trust? It's not just the fact that, oh, yeah, there's just a couple of things that you admit to. What about austerity? You notice he missed out on that. He missed out on that, Gee, why didn't he talk about austerity? On the topic of membership, our party, of course, faces a major challenge, the lack of youth appeal. And to appeal to the youth, you've got to be able to offer them policies. Your party is never going to do that. This would mean doing a lot of things that the older end of your party just would not like. Even at the last election, with Reform's capabilities were unclear, they took more of the 18 to 24 vote than the Conservatives, 9% versus 8%. Wow. 1% more, once again, showing that voter range votes very, very badly, and it should get out and vote a lot more. I wish they would. Anyway, young people in this country are, of course, deeply troubled about their future. Will they be able to afford to buy a house, have a family, in response to what was that last government's flagship policy for, of course, young people, national service? It appeared to be a very last gasp to keep the older voters from now switching shades of blue, and it highlighted at best and ignored at worst the contempt of which young people are treated by the political system. You notice he said political system there, not his party. Because that's exactly who treated him wrong on that. Yes, of course, there are exemptions, but on the whole, young people feel entirely disengaged with the political system. It is any wonder that, of course, they turn out in droves now to protests in Westminster. The solution is to work with young people, recognise the issue they face, present an actual solid plan to address them. These people are at the start of their voting record. Make a bad first impression, and we can lose them for decades. That's already happened. That's already happened. Already happened. Because your party will never prevent any solid plan to address those issues of those young people. So, what comes next? Things are likely to get a lot worse before they get better. Voters are, of course, very angry, both the Conservatives and Labour, with Reform and Lib Dems now benefiting from the losses. It may be that we are now entering a new era of multi-party politics, and we will need to now compete for even more votes and media attention. That could very well be the case. I think what you are getting at the moment is mass, voter disillusionment. I think that's just the way we are. Labour, I do think they've done a lot of bad stuff, but I also do think they've done some good stuff as well, as I've said many times. But all the stuff they're doing is going to take time to get through. It's going to take time to sort of filter down. Andy Burnham has said this as well, that even though they've done a lot of this good stuff, it's going to take time for it to filter down to get through to people. Will it get through before the next election? Who knows? But they do need to, I think, look maybe what they could do for some short-term wins. That will certainly be something they could do, but we'll see. But again, part of the problem why we're in the situation is the fact that you had, especially Cameron Osborne, looking for quick short-term solutions that they could turn around very quickly and win on. And this country is very, very much a victim of short-termism, not looking at the big picture, not looking at what this policy is going to be like in 10 to 15 years time, etc. So back to this. But it is, of course, now wrong to call us finished. We must not be consigned to the political history books. We can, of course, rebuild if we hold to our core principles. Again, what are those core principles? It will only be done now in the weeks and months, but through now years now trying to get the basics right. The only way that we'll be able to start rebuilding that trust in the Conservative brand is to combine that with a robust, thoughtful set out of policies, a drive for membership, a real answer now for young people, and a crusade against our opponents. We will start now to see success again. After 1997, it took 13 years for us to get back to the government. We must try to now hold our nerve, back Kemi Badenoch, which most of the party is not, and be steadfast in our opposition to those parties that, if they had their way, would see the Tories thrown out of Parliament. Good luck. Good luck, because your party ain't going to do that. Your party is not going to do that. It is nowhere close. Nowhere close. And as someone who is watching all this mess unfold and is documenting all this stuff, that's why I'm doing this video. It's why I'm still following all this conservative nonsense, even though they're not in power anymore. It's because sooner or later they could fall, they could fail, or we could see something that hasn't happened in a long, long time in our country's politics, and that is the death of a political party. That could be where they end up. And I will say this now: I don't think Kemi Badenoch's going to be in charge of the Conservative Party in the next 12 months. I don't think she will be. I think this time next year, she will be gone. I will be very surprised if she does survive. But even then, I'll be like, yeah, actually, no, let's rephrase that. I do not think Kemi Badenoch will be leader of the Conservative Party by the end of 2026. Going into 2027, I think they will have a new leader. I do very much think that. If you want my honest sort of political appraisal of that. But yeah, and Jarek won't do any good either. Jarek was just be as bad as Kemi Badenoch, just in a lot different ways, but he ain't going to recover the party either. So, as always, let me know what you think down below. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.